Hello everyone, it is finally Libby. You may have noticed that I have not been posting videos for the last few weeks during a time when typically one posts a lot of videos. There's a lot of stuff to wrap up from 2018, and the reason for that is a plague of technical difficulties. This is my third time filming this video. My first one I filmed, I started editing, and then my laptop died, and I only had a copy of that video on the laptop that died, and I deleted it from my SD card, so that one's gone, so I refilmed it. And then I stuck the SD card into my new laptop, and it just corrupted the file like that, and I could not get it back at all. So if I sound kind of bored when I'm talking about these books, it's not the book's fault, it's just that I kind of have this script down pat, and I'm a little bit bored with what I'm saying, but I'm not bored with the books. So, are you ready for the first joke that I've been perfecting for the last couple of weeks? I don't know if you know this, but it has recently been 1, my birthday, 2, Jesus's birthday, which means I got some stuff, and some of that stuff was books. Let's talk about them. So the first book I want to talk about is actually was a Christmas present for me in 2011, but it somehow got incorporated into my parents' library, and my mom was visiting in December, and so she brought it, and so it has been reincorporated into my library, and that is Anne Radcliffe's The Mysteries of Udolpho, of Northanger Abbey fame, if you have heard of it nowhere else. This is a late 18th century Gothic novel. The back is like the most 18th century sounding thing I have ever heard of, so I'll read some of it to you. Set in 1584, the tale unfolds amid the secret chambers of a chateau in southern France and a castle in the remote Apennines populated by pirates, brigands, ghosts, and specters. Emily St. Aubert, imprisoned by her rapacious guardian Count Montoni and his sadistic wife, struggles to reconcile her father's teachings of reserve and moderation with her own reckless passions. I don't know how we cannot read the first sentence after that. Volume 1, Chapter 1. On the pleasant banks of the Garonne in the province of Gascony stood in the year 1584 the chateau of Monsieur St. Aubert. And then, in an interesting turn of events, I received from my family exclusively non-fiction for Christmas / my birthday. So strap in. We're going to start with Our Magnificent Bastard Tongue by John McWhorter, who I initially encountered through his podcast Lexicon Valley, which is on Slate and is about words. John McWhorter is a linguist. I already own his book Talking Back, Talking Black, which my Aunt Sue also gave to me last Christmas and have not read it yet. So I will have a good John McWhorter binge built up. So this is a history of English, mainly about how like different languages have sort of what they have contributed to English throughout its history. Some of the chapter titles are We Speak a Miscegenated Grammar and A Lesson from the Celtic Impact. And the first sentence is, the first chapter in this new history of English is that bastardization I mentioned. Next, I got the second book in the Hinges of History series by Thomas Cahill. It is The Gifts of the Jews, How a Tribe of Desert Nomads Changed the Way Everyone Thinks and Feels. The Hinges of History is Cahill's series about like what he feels are insufficiently explored times in history and like what has sort of as it says here, created modern thought. I'm really interested to see what he's going to do with this book, because if he's arguing that the events recorded in ancient Jewish texts, namely the Torah, did occur and thus had an impact on modern thoughts, oh boy, is he gonna have some good arguments for that, because I am what's the snappy way to say this? I'm a Moses skeptic. I do not think there is sufficient evidence to be confident that all of the stuff described in definitely Genesis, but also Exodus, occurred. But if Cahill is arguing that the Jewish thought, which was inspired by the stories or possibly real events described in those books, that those thoughts have affected modern thought. He will have a much easier time persuading me. So look forward to a completely uncontroversial review that I will do in, the coming years. I was about to say the coming weeks, but let's be honest about my turnover rate. The first sentence is, somewhat more than 5 millennia ago, a human hand first carved a written word and so initiated history, mankind's recorded story. Next, I received a very old edition of volumes 1 and 2 of the Diary of Frances Burney. I am slightly uncomfortable holding a book this old, and I hope I don't destroy it. So Frances Burney wrote Evelina, which is a book that I read I read last year. She was writing in the late 18th century and, was sort of doing that sort of marriage game type novel. I don't know that much about Frances Burney's life. I'm having a difficult time not conflating her with Maria Edgeworth and Elizabeth Inchbald, who are other female writers from that time that I've read. I think she is the one who ended up married to a Frenchman who had to flee the terror. And the first sentence of her diary is, to have some account of my thoughts, manners, acquaintance, and actions when the hour arrives in which time is more nimble than memory is the reason which induces me to keep a journal. Then I have 2 books which have become relatively popular on BookTube recently. They are both by Ruth Goodman, and that is How to be a Tudor and How to be a Victorian, which are histories of everyday life from these 2 periods. Ruth Goodman initially came to my attention through her documentary series. She does, what's it called? Experimental archaeology, which is where you're doing archaeology not by digging up old things, but by trying to recreate the experiences and seeing sort of what would one logically do, and like what if you try to plant wheat in the way that this set of directions tells you to plant wheat, do you actually end up with something successful, or are we misunderstanding, whatever these period directions are? And she has taken what she learned in such documentary series as Tudor Monastery Farm and Victorian Pharmacy and Victorian Farm, and turned that into these books. And she has done several other documentary series. She's done like Wartime Farm, Edwardian Farm. I think there's some other ones, so hopefully there will be more dawn to dusk guides coming to us in the future. The first sentence of How to be a Tudor is, just before dawn, the cockerels began their morning chorus and people clambered out of bed. And How to be a Victorian starts with, it began with a shiver. I also received a pretty niche book, which actually is presented as nonfiction but is in fact fiction, and that is Myths and Monsters of Reston, Virginia, which is my hometown, and this is a collection of myths about Annie, the Lake Anne monster. I used to live in Lake Anne. If you remember my previous filming location, that was in Lake Anne, and I have never seen the Lake Anne monster. There's also a section on the Reston nudist colony. I feel like if we had a nudist colony, I would have known about it. So this will certainly come in handy if I am ever faced with a readathon challenge to read a book set in your hometown, which is kind of difficult for me because I lived in the suburbs of Washington, D.C., and I feel like any book set in Washington, D.C. is not going to be a book that I want to read. But here's one specifically set in Virginia. Although this is not the only book set in Reston, Virginia. We got another one called The Hot Zone, which is nonfiction, and it's about the time that there was an Ebola scare in Reston. Fun times. The first sentence, which is from the fictional diary of our intrepid adventurer, is "Confounded curse." And then moving on to the books that I got for myself, which are decidedly less real. The first one is one that I am currently reading, and so you'll be hearing about it in my wrap-up very shortly, so I will not say too much about it. It is Once Upon a River by Diane Setterfield, who wrote the brilliant and famous 13th Tale, and the brilliant and less famous Bellman and Black. Since you will hear about this very shortly, and it takes a bit of time to describe the premise of this book, I will just say it is about a miraculous occurrence that happens in a small town on the banks of the Thames in the sort of mid to late 19th century. Next, I grabbed a recent Man Booker winner, which is Lincoln in the Bardo by George Saunders. I'm sure you've seen this all over BookTube. So, like, for a while in there, something being longlisted for the Man Booker was kind of a sign to me that I would not be interested in it, but now I am older and wiser and more appreciative of literary fiction, and I think Lincoln in the Bardo was something that sort of helped change my mind there, because, you know, I would watch other people's videos about the Man Booker, and before this book I was like, whatever, I think this is all just too literary for me. And then I saw this and I was like, oh man, that sounds really good though. So if you don't know what this is about, this is, oh, I just realized that this is actually also this is set in Washington, D.C. I could also get away with reading this for a Read a Book from Your Hometown challenge. It's not even about politics. Well, that's nice. Have you guys, like, changed the way you think about books since joining BookTube, in the way that you're like, what sort of readathon challenges could this fulfill? Like, is this book under 200 pages? Because that's a common challenge. Does this author have the same initials as me? I definitely sort of have that in the back of my mind when I'm doing my book purchasing. But this is about Abraham Lincoln. Shortly after the death of his young son, Willie, he goes to his grave, and this novel is narrated by the ghosts of the graveyard. And the first sentence, which is spoken by one Hans Vollmann, is, "On our wedding day, I was 46, she was 18. And I also picked up another BookTube darling. Can you guess what it is by this little bit of color? It's Tin Man by Sarah Winman. Now, based on other people's videos, it seems like there's not a lot of plot to either give as premise or to experience in the reading of this book. The back says, it begins with two boys, Ellis and Michael, who are inseparable, and the boys become men, and then Annie walks into their lives, and it changes nothing and everything. Now, I, as a Monty Python completionist, will have an additional layer of experience to this novel, which I'm pretty sure Sarah Winman did not intend, although if she did. And that is that, to me, the names Michael and Ellis are just supposed to belong to one person, and that one person is a man that Eric Idle cannot find, no matter how hard he tries, in a department store. The first sentence is, all Dora Judd ever told anyone about that night 3 weeks before Christmas was that she won the painting in a raffle. And the last book that I grabbed was one that I heard about from Claire at Claire Reads Books. This was one of her favorite books of 2017, and that is Idaho by Emily Ruskovich. So this is set, surprise, surprise, in Idaho. Our main characters are a married couple, Wade and, is her name also Anne? Or did I just get confused? Jenny. Nope. Yep, Anne. Okay, Wade and Anne. Anne is Wade's second wife, and the reason he is no longer married to his first wife is because several years ago, some, like, horrific catastrophe occurred involving her and their two daughters in the woods. And so Wade has, like, PTSD from this, but he also has an inherited form of very early onset dementia. So things will trigger his PTSD and make him incredibly upset, but he can't really remember why, and he can't really explain it to his new wife. So that sounds fascinating. And also, what do you mean all of the books I read are just iterations of Rebecca? I have no idea what you're talking about. The final first sentence I shall read to you is, they never drove the truck except once or twice a year to get firewood. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you have enjoyed this, and I will be back soon with, I don't know what video I'm gonna do next, but I will see you in it. That's actually also not true. You will see me in it. I will not see you unless you make your own videos, and then I'll see you in my own time. Let's stop.